My name is Marcus Aldridge. I am 37 years old, and for as long as I can remember, my family had a version of me that had nothing to do with who I actually was. My brother Derek was the athlete, my sister Renee was the socialite, and me, I was the sensitive one, said with a tilt of the head, said the way you describe a dog that doesn't quite fit the breed, not mean exactly, just accurate enough to sting. Last March at my father's retirement party, 60 people in the backyard of the house I grew up in, my uncle stood up to give a toast. He talked about my father. He talked about Derek's football scholarship. He talked about Renee's wedding. Then he looked around the room and said, with a small, warm laugh, "And Marcus is here somewhere being thoughtful in a corner." People laughed. My father laughed. I was standing 8 feet away, holding a cup of sparkling water, watching 60 people locate me with their eyes and then immediately look back at my uncle. What none of them knew was that the woman standing next to me, the one they assumed was my date, was not my date. She was Dr. Lena Osai, one of the most respected documentary filmmakers in the country. She had driven 4 hours to be there, and what she said next, quietly just to me, changed the entire evening. She said, "They have no idea who you are, do they?" Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories, where real emotions meet life-changing moments. If you have ever been the one your family summarized in a single word, this story is for you. Drop a comment telling me your family label. I read every single one. And if you are new here, subscribe so you never miss a story. I was 7 the first time I understood what sensitive meant in my family's language. It did not mean thoughtful. It did not mean perceptive. It meant not Derek, not loud, not easy to explain at a barbecue. Derek was 12 that summer and had just made the junior travel baseball team. The whole extended family drove 40 minutes to his first game. There were lawn chairs, a cooler, a banner my mother had made out of poster board and red marker that said GODEREK in letters she had clearly practiced. I stood at the edge of the bleachers in a shirt that was slightly too small because my mother had bought it for Derek 2 summers ago and handed it down without checking the size. I struck out twice in the same season on my school's chess team. Not struck out, I lost 2 matches at a regional tournament, but there is no banner for chess. There is no cooler. There is no 40-minute drive. My mother said she would have come, but she had already promised to take Renee shopping for her dance recital outfit. She said it without apology, the way you tell someone the weather. That was the year I started keeping a journal, not because anyone suggested it, because I had discovered that I could put things into words in a way that made them feel less large. I filled notebooks, cheap composition books from the drugstore, and hid them under the loose floorboard in my closet the way other kids hid magazines. Not because the writing was secret, because I had learned early that things I cared about were safer when no one else knew I cared about them. Labels work like gravity in a family. Once they exist, everything bends toward them. Everything that happens to you gets sorted by the label, not by what actually happened. Derek breaks his collarbone at practice. The family rallies, organizes, coordinates hospital runs and meal trains. Marcus gets a rejection letter from his first journalism internship application at 16. His mother says, "At least you tried," and goes back to watching television. Renee brings home a boyfriend at 17, and the house becomes a dinner party. Marcus brings home a short story he'd written that his English teacher had submitted to a statewide competition, that his teacher had submitted, unprompted, because she thought it was extraordinary. And his father reads the first paragraph, nods once and says, "That is good," and puts it on the counter next to the mail. The story won. I did not tell them. I folded the certificate and put it in the composition book with the loose floorboard. If you want to know how a family has organized itself, count what gets repeated at the dinner table. The stories told again and again, sanded smooth by use, are the ones the family has decided are true. In my family, the stories were about Derek's touchdowns, Renee's homecoming court, my father's promotion at the auto plant, my mother's famous potato salad that everyone requested at every function. I appeared in two recurring stories. In the first, I was 7 years old and cried at a fireworks show, which my uncle recounted every 4th of July as though it was the funniest thing that had ever happened in the Aldridge family. In the second, I was 11 and got lost at the state fair for 40 minutes, which was told as an adventure story with Derek as the hero, who finally found me near the funnel cake stand, not as a story about a child who had wandered off because no one was watching him. Two stories in 37 years. In both of them, I was the punchline or the problem. I left home at 18 on a track scholarship, not athletics, academics. A full ride to the state university's journalism program, the kind of scholarship the financial aid office told me they gave out twice a decade. My mother said she was proud. She said it the way people say fine when you ask how they're doing. My father shook my hand. Derek was already 3 states away at football camp. Renee cried a little, genuinely, because we had always been closer than either of us admitted. The night before I left, I went to my closet and pulled out the composition books, 14 of them. I put them in my backpack. I left the loose floorboard open, like a door someone forgot to close. I built my career the way you fill a composition book, page by page in private, without waiting for anyone to tell you it was worth doing. Junior year, I landed a piece in the university's literary magazine that a professor forwarded to a contact at a regional newspaper. I wrote for that paper for 3 years while finishing my degree. My first major story was about a chemical plant that had been quietly contaminating the groundwater of a rural township for a decade. The family that owned the plant had donated a wing to the local hospital. The town had no idea. The story ran on a Saturday. By Monday, the state environmental agency had opened a formal investigation. I was 23. I did not call home to tell them. By 27, I was at a national publication. By 30, I had broken 3 investigations that led to federal inquiries. The kind of work that wins awards no one outside the industry has heard of, and that everyone inside the industry recognizes as the reason journalism still matters. I won 2 of those awards before I turned 35. Both times I accepted at small ceremonies in cities my family would not have traveled to even if I had told them, which I did not, because I had stopped narrating my life to people who had decided the story was already written. My mother called on my birthday every year. She talked about Derek's knee surgery, Renee's kids, the neighbor's new fence, the potato salad she was bringing to the church potluck. She asked how I was doing. I said fine. She said good. We hung up. This was love in the Aldridge family. Present, reliable, and sealed like a jar no one thought to open. There is a moment in every estranged life when the distance collapses unexpectedly. For me, it was my father's retirement party. He had worked at the auto plant for 31 years. He came home smelling like machine oil every evening of my childhood. He had hands like wood. He never missed a day except the year he had his appendix out, and even then he was back in 8 days when the doctor told him to take 3 weeks. He was the kind of man who did not need you to admire him because he was too busy to notice whether you did. I came for him, not for the party, not for my mother's organized seating chart or the backyard that smelled like propane and potato salad. I came because my father, who had never asked me for a single thing in 37 years, had called me himself 2 weeks before the party and said, "I would like you to be there, Marcus." Not your mother, him. His voice was different on the phone, quieter, like something had shifted in his chest and made more room. I said I would be there. Then I sent an email to Lena Osei. Lena and I had known each other for 4 years. We had met at a journalism conference where she was speaking and I was moderating a panel. We had stayed in contact. She had been developing a long-form documentary series about investigative journalists whose work had changed public policy, the people behind the stories that rewrote laws, not just headlines. She had been talking to me about being one of the subjects for 18 months. I had been deflecting for 18 months because something about being seen still felt unsafe in a way I could not fully name. I mentioned the party in an email about logistics. I told her my hometown had a county courthouse from 1887 that had never been renovated and was worth seeing if she was ever in the region. She wrote back, "I might just drive out." I believed her about as much as people believe anything said in logistics emails. She showed up at 3:30 in the afternoon in a gray linen blazer with a leather bag over her shoulder, and the self-possession of someone who had spent 20 years walking into rooms full of strangers and making them trust her. The party told the story my family had been telling for 30 years. Derek arrived with his wife and 3 boys. The yard reorganized itself around them the way a room reorganizes around sunlight. My uncle clapped Derek on the shoulder hard enough to be heard from 20 feet. My mother handed him a beer before he finished saying hello. The boys ran for the food table, and no one told them to slow down. I arrived 11 minutes earlier than Derek and parked my car on the street and sat in it for 4 minutes. Counted my breaths. In for 4, out for 6. An old technique. Then I got out and walked into the yard, and my mother said, "Oh, Marcus, I was not sure you would make it, even though I had confirmed twice by email and once by phone." I found my father by the grill. He was wearing an apron that said Grill Sergeant and holding tongs and looking at the coals the way he always looked at things, like they were a problem he was working out quietly. I stood next to him. He did not say anything for a moment. Then he said, "Glad you are here," and handed me the tongs. I flipped the chicken. We did not speak again for 10 minutes. It was the most comfortable 10 minutes of the entire party. The seating for dinner had been arranged by my mother. There was a main table under the pergola with my parents, Derek and his wife, Renee and her husband, and my uncle. There were 4 other tables. My name card was at the table nearest the fence, the one with the recycling bins behind it. I was seated between a cousin I had not seen in 6 years and an empty chair where my mother had placed a third cousin who never showed up. I had been at parties my entire life that looked exactly like this. The geometry never changed. There was always a center and there was always an edge, and my position had been decided before I arrived, before the invitations went out, before anyone asked whether I wanted to sit somewhere else. The center was for the people the family had decided were worth centering. The edge was for the ones they had decided were manageable in smaller doses. I ate my food and watched the main table. My uncle was telling a story. My mother was nodding and laughing at the right moments, the practiced laugh of a woman who has been at parties for 40 years and knows exactly when to deploy it. Derek's youngest son climbed onto my father's knee. My father did not laugh, but he put one large hand on the boy's back and kept it there, and that was its own kind of joy. I was watching this when Lena sat down next to me with a plate of potato salad and a glass of sweet tea and said, "Your cousin's chair is empty, and your mother's potato salad is excellent, and I think we should talk." Lena had been watching the yard for 20 minutes before she sat down. She had the skill that all good documentary filmmakers have. She could stand in a room looking like she was simply present and actually be cataloging everything. The power structure, the deference patterns, the people who spoke, and the people who waited to be spoken to. She had spent 20 years filming human systems. My family was not complicated to her. She had seen 100 versions of this backyard. She asked me how I was doing. I said fine. She looked at me the way she looked at interview subjects who said they were doing fine, like she was giving the word a moment to decide whether it wanted to stay or leave. Then my uncle gave his toast. He stood and tapped his beer bottle and talked about my father's 31 years at the plant. He talked about Derek's scholarship and the year Derek was named team captain. He talked about Renee's wedding and how beautiful she had looked and what a good family she had built. He talked about my mother's cooking and the famous potato salad. He looked around the yard and he found me, and he smiled the smile of a man about to deliver a line he has delivered many times in many rooms, and he said, "And Marcus is here somewhere, being thoughtful in a corner." 60 people laughed. My father laughed. I was 8 feet away, holding a cup of sparkling water, and I did not exist in any meaningful sense in that yard. Lena leaned close and said, "They have no idea who you are, do they?" I looked at her. "No," I said, "I do not think they do." She said, "May I?" I did not ask what she meant. I already knew. I had been deflecting for 18 months. I was tired of deflecting. I nodded. Lena stood up from the table by the recycling bins. She straightened her blazer. She picked up her leather bag. She walked to the pergola with the same walk she had walked into every room for 20 years, not hurried, not performative, just present and certain. She said, "Excuse me," not loud, just clear. My uncle stopped mid-sentence. My mother turned. The yard went quiet in the way yards go quiet when something outside the script is about to happen. Lena reached into her bag and took out a business card and placed it on the table in front of my mother. "My name is Lena Osai," she said. "I am a documentary filmmaker. I have been working in public interest journalism for 22 years. My most recent film received a Peabody Award." She said it the way you state a fact, not the way you establish a credential, just information. "Here it is." Then she said, "I drove 4 hours today, not for the party, for him." She turned and indicated me. Not dramatically. Just a small extension of her arm, palm open, the way you point to something that has been in the room the entire time. The yard was silent. My mother looked at the business card. My uncle set down his beer. Derek's wife said something quiet to Derek. I watched my father's face. Lena opened her bag. She took out printed photographs, the kind printed at a photo lab, high resolution, full color. She placed them on the main table. The first photograph was a front page, a national newspaper. The byline was mine. The story was the chemical plant investigation. 300,000 people had learned their water was safe to drink again because of what that story uncovered. She placed the second photograph. A regional newspaper's Sunday magazine. A profile. The headline read, "The Reporter Who Changed the Law." The photo accompanying the article was of me, sitting at a desk with a wall of composition books behind me, looking at the camera with an expression I did not remember making. A third photograph. An awards ceremony. I was standing at a podium in front of a room of 300 journalists. The caption identified it as the Hillman Prize for Social Justice Journalism, one of the oldest investigative journalism awards in the country. I had won it at 34. My mother stared at the photographs the way people stare at something that contradicts information they have held as settled for a long time. Her face went through a series of expressions I could not fully name. She had not known. That was the thing. She genuinely had not known. None of them had. Lena said, "Marcus Aldridge has broken 11 investigations in 14 years. 4 of them led to federal policy changes. His work has been credited by 3 separate congressional committees. He is the subject of a documentary I have been making for the past 2 years, because his career represents something important about what journalism can do when someone refuses to stop doing it." She paused, let the words sit. "He is your family. I assumed you knew." The 5 words that reorganize everything. I assumed you knew. Delivered without anger, without accusation, with the quiet certainty of a woman stating a fact that the room had apparently forgotten to hold. My uncle recovered first, the way people who make their living out of social ease always recover first. "Well, of course," he said. "We have always known Marcus was talented." A short laugh. "You know how families are, we do not always say it enough." He looked at me. I did not say anything. I was watching my father. My father had not spoken since the toast. He was still at the main table, the large hand that had been on his grandson's back now flat on the tablecloth. He was looking at the photographs. Slowly, the way he read instruction manuals. Carefully. Like he wanted to understand every word before he moved to the next one. Derek said, I knew he wrote stuff. He shifted in his chair. I just did not know it was. He gestured at the photographs. This. My mother said, "We are very proud of Marcus." She said it in the voice she used when the pastor came for dinner. Bright, present, performing something just past the edge of sincere. We have always been proud. Renee said nothing. She was looking at me from across the yard with an expression I recognized from childhood, the one she used when she was catching up to something that everyone else had apparently known and she had missed. Renee was the one sibling who could tolerate the feeling of being wrong. She did not like it, but she could hold it without needing to move it around the room until it became someone else's problem. She walked over, stood next to me, did not say anything immediately. Then she said, "I would have come, Marcus. If I had known, I would have come to the ceremony." "I know," I said. "Why didn't you tell us?" I looked at her. 37 years of dinners where my stories were the ones that waited at the edge of the table. 37 years of phone calls about Derek's knee and the church potluck. 37 years of fine and good and being thoughtful in a corner. "You would have come," I said, "but you also would not have understood why it mattered, and I did not have room for both at the same time." She looked at me for a long moment. Her eyes were wet, not from guilt exactly, but from the particular grief of realizing you were absent from something that mattered and did not know you were absent until someone showed you the empty space you left. "I am sorry," she said. She meant it. With Renee, you could always tell when she meant something because she said it quietly instead of quickly. My uncle made his approach 30 minutes later, after the initial shock had metabolized into something the yard could manage. He came at me sideways, the way people come at things they are not ready to face directly, complimenting Lena's work first, asking about her Peabody film, positioning himself as someone who had always appreciated journalism, always respected the craft. Lena answered him pleasantly and thoroughly, and gave him nothing he could use. Eventually he turned to me and said, "You know that toast was just a bit of fun, Marcus. You know how it is with families. We tease the ones we love." I said, "You have made that joke about me being in a corner at every family event since I was 17. It is not a tease. It is a verdict you deliver every time." He blinked, a long blink, the kind that happens when a truth you have been comfortable with stops being comfortable. His wife, my Aunt Carol, who had been standing behind him, said quietly, "He is right, Gerald." Gerald looked at his wife. She did not look away. In 40 years of marriage, she had apparently been waiting for the right moment to say that. He sat down in an empty chair. He did not say anything else about the toast. My mother found me near the garage, at the edge of the party, away from the main tables. She had waited until the crowd had dispersed into smaller conversations. She had been doing this my whole life, saving the important conversations for private spaces, where there were no witnesses and she could say things that were not on record. She looked at the photographs Lena had laid on the table. Then she looked at me. "Why didn't you tell us?" she said. Her voice had the quality of someone who was preparing to be wronged by the answer. "I told you about the first newspaper story, Mom. I called you when it published. You said that's nice and asked whether I had eaten." Her mouth pressed together. "I was worried about you. That is what mothers do. You worry about Derek's knee and Renee's kids and the potato salad," I said. "You asked me once in the past 5 years whether I liked my work." "That is not," she stopped, started again. "You never share anything. You were always like that. So private, so in your head. How was I supposed to know?" I looked at her. 60 years old, in a backyard she had organized down to the seating cards, in a life she had arranged carefully around the children she understood, and the husband she had made a life with, and the label she had given me at 7 years old that had never been updated, never revised, never questioned. "I was private because private was safe," I said. "I kept the compositions books under the floorboard because the things I cared about were safer when no one else knew I cared about them. I learned that at home." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said something I was not expecting. She said, "I did not know how to talk to you. I never did. Derek and Renee were easy. They wanted what I understood. You wanted something I could not see." It was the most honest thing she had ever said to me. I recognized it as honesty because it cost her something. I could have said a great many things in that moment. I had enough receipts, 37 years of them. The composition books, the award certificate under the floorboard, the first page story she had said that's nice about. I could have laid them all out in the backyard next to Lena's photographs and made a case that would have been airtight and devastating and entirely beside the point. I said, "I know, Mom. I know you didn't know how." She looked at me. Her eyes were the eyes of a woman confronting something she had been moving around for 30 years and had finally stopped being able to outpace. She did not hug me. That was not something we did, but she put her hand on my arm for a moment, brief, real. Then she walked back to her party. I found my father by the grill again, where the coals had gone gray. The party was winding. Someone had turned off the music. Derek's boys were asleep in the backseat of Derek's car, visible through the window. Renee was helping my mother clear the main table, moving quietly and without discussion, the efficient language of women who have cleaned up after events their whole lives. My father was sitting in a lawn chair with his apron still on, and the tongs resting across his knees and his eyes on the darkening yard. I pulled a chair next to his. He looked at me, not at the photographs on the table, not at Lena's business card, not at the party that had rearranged itself around a new piece of information. At me, with the same directness he had looked at the coals earlier, working something out. 31 years, he said, at the plant. Every morning I went in, I thought about whether it was worth it, whether I was building something. He paused. I was not always sure. I said, "You built this." He gestured around the yard. "The house, the kids, the life, you built it." He shook his head slowly. "Not the way you mean." We sat for a moment. Then he said, "I read your stories. Not the recent ones, I did not know about those, but the early ones. The paper used to be at the library and I would go in on Saturdays before the plant shift. I read them." I looked at him. "You never said." "No," he said. "I did not know how to say it without it being a thing. You know how your mother." He stopped. We both knew how my mother. "But I read them," he said, "every one." I thought about the composition books under the floorboard. The certificate I folded and hid. The phone calls about Derek's knee. The 37 years of managing the distance between what I was and what my family could see. I reached into my jacket pocket. I had brought one of Lena's printed photographs with me when I left the table, the one from the awards ceremony, the one where I was at the podium in front of 300 people. I held it out to him. He took it, looked at it with the same careful attention he gave everything, his large hands on the edges of the photograph. "I should have said something," he said. His voice was the voice of a man who had spent 31 years going to work and coming home smelling like machine oil and saying very little, and who was now at the end of something and could see the shape of what he had left unsaid. "You kept showing up, Dad," I said, "every Saturday at the library. That is saying something." He held the photograph for a long moment. Then he set it on his knee and put his hand over it flat, the way he had put his hand on his grandson's back. Steady. I did not look away. Lena was at her car when I found her at the end of the evening. She had stayed 4 hours. She had eaten 2 helpings of potato salad and talked to my Aunt Carol about documentary filmmaking and answered my cousin's questions about the Peabody and sat at the table by the recycling bins with the patience of someone who had nowhere else to be. I said, "Thank you." She said, "Your family is not unusual, Marcus. That is the important thing to understand. They did what families do. They organized around what they could see, and they stopped looking for what they couldn't." I said, "That does not make it less." "No," she said, "it doesn't." She handed me an envelope, the formal letter of commitment for the documentary. Final title, shooting schedule, release window. We have been talking about this for 18 months. I think you are ready. I looked at the envelope, thought about the composition books, the loose floorboard, the certificate folded small enough to disappear, 37 years of making myself manageable. I took the envelope. She drove away in her gray sedan with the out of state plates. I stood in the gravel driveway for a moment. The backyard behind me was quiet. My mother was in the kitchen window, cleaning. My father was still in the lawn chair under the darkening sky with the photograph on his knee. I walked back to where he was sitting. I sat down next to him one more time. He looked at me. Then he said the only thing there was left to say. He said, "Tell me about the work." So I did. For the first time in my life, in the backyard of the house I grew up in, I told my father everything. The chemical plant story, the federal investigations, the congressional testimony, the Peabody, the Hillman, the documentary, all of it. I talked for 40 minutes. He listened the way he listened, completely, without interruption, with the slow nod of a man processing every word at full weight. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "That is something, Marcus." Not much, but from him, from this man, in this backyard, at the end of this day, it was the most I had ever received from any room. 3 months later, the documentary premiered at a film festival in New York. My father did not come, his knees made the travel hard. My mother did not come, she had the church potluck. Derek sent a text that said, "Congrats, man, looks great." Renee flew in. She sat in the fourth row and did not take her eyes off the screen. After the film, she found me in the lobby. She was composed in the way that people are composed when they have been crying and have decided to be done crying for the evening. She said, "I did not know it was like that. Your childhood." I said, "I know." "I am sorry," she said, again, with the same quiet she had used in the backyard. I said, "I know that too." We stood in the lobby for a moment. Around us, people were talking about the film, about the journalism, about the policy implications of the cases covered. People I had never met were talking about the work I had done in rooms I had sat in alone. It was a strange feeling, not triumphant, just real. Finally, plainly, undeniably real. My uncle sent a card, handwritten on stationery with his initials on it. He wrote, "I heard the film is something. I hope you know we are proud." I put the card in my jacket pocket, not to keep it close, just because I had not yet decided what to do with it. My father called the morning after the premiere. I answered on the second ring. He said, "Your Aunt Carol showed me how to find the film online. I watched some of it." I said, "You did?" He said, "The part where you talk about why you started keeping journals." He paused. "The thing you said, about private being safe." "Yes," I said. A long silence, the kind my father used to collect himself. Then he said, "I should have made it safer. At home, I should have done that." He said it the way he said everything that mattered. Once, directly, without decoration, leaving it on the table for you to pick up or leave. I picked it up. I said, "You read the stories every Saturday at the library. That is not nothing, Dad." He said, "No, but it should have been more." We stayed on the phone for a while after that, not saying much, just staying. I am in my apartment now. The composition books are on the shelf above my desk, all 14 of them, the ones from under the floorboard. I brought them here years ago and I still have not read them back through. I am not ready yet, but I like knowing they are there. Proof that I was always putting things into words, even when no one was reading. Next to them is the award certificate, finally unfolded. It has creases in it from the folding, white lines across the text. I did not iron them out. They are part of the document now. They are part of the record. Next to the certificate is the photograph from the award ceremony, the one Lena printed, the one my father held flat in his hand. And next to that, something new. My father mailed it 3 weeks after the premiere. A photograph, square, slightly faded, the Kodak kind from a disposable camera. Of me, at 12 years old at a regional chess tournament, I am bent over a board mid-game, completely absorbed with the expression of someone who has forgotten that anyone else is in the room. On the back of the photograph in my father's handwriting, I was there. I just didn't know how to tell you. I did not know he had come to that tournament. He had never mentioned it. He drove 40 minutes in the other direction from the auto plant to a school gymnasium in a town he had no other reason to visit, and watched his son play chess, and never said a word about it for 25 years. The photograph is on the shelf now, between the composition books and the award. Here is what I know now. You cannot restore a family to something it never was. You cannot make them see you the way you deserve to be seen in 1994 or 2004 or any year that has already happened. That time is not available for renovation. But sometimes, not always, not even often, but sometimes, you can stand in a backyard on a summer evening and say the thing that has been true about you for 37 years and watch the room catch up to it. And sometimes that is enough to start from. I was never the sensitive one. I was just the one who felt things precisely enough to write them down. Turns out that is a different skill set entirely. That is my story. 37 years of being summarized in one word, one stranger with a leather bag, and 14 composition books that were always worth reading. If this story reminded you of your own, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment, hit subscribe. If you have ever been the one your family reduced to a single sentence, I see you. Being invisible to them does not mean you were never there. It means they stopped looking. And the work you did while they were not watching is still the work you did.